All right, there we go. Okay. Took it a second. I was a little nervous after Zoom had a little outage yesterday that it wasn't working. All right. Well, welcome everyone. I see participants trickling in. For anyone who's been here before, you probably know the drill, but just to say up front, we're going to give it about another 3 minutes to let people who are coming from meetings or hopping from Zoom call to Zoom call and who want to grab a coffee to get on. But in the meantime, hey Brad, how are you?
Well, how are you?
Doing well. It's been, I mean, a little bit of a minute here. How's everything? You're based out of Philadelphia area, right?
That's right. Yep.
Awesome. Nearby with us. We're in the New York area. In fact, for everyone who is joining on the call, I like to do like a little, not really icebreaker, but if you want to message in the chat, just where you're dialing in from, your title, anything about you that you feel comfortable sharing. We like to get people posting in here, make it interactive so that we have lots of good content to go on once we kick off the conversation. I can start. Nice. Thank you, Dawn. So, Brad, how has it been? Like anything new with you?
Yeah. Well, coming out of, I've spent a lot of time in the room that you see me in here today, going through the comp cycles, and so happy to be finishing that, rolling that up, getting ready to do other things, and get out of this, spend a little bit more time out of this room and hopefully outdoors.
What was your comp cycle start to cut off?
Yeah, we probably did. I would say we were a little bit delayed with performance management because we tried something new this year. So, but pretty much January through really through this past Monday in terms of the effective date for performance, merit, and bonus, and stock is a carve out. But yeah, it's a long period of time to take the business through.
I was gonna say that's yeah. So you're just this week coming up for air.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. we
Yep.
have we have our lessons learned next week, and then we're already feverishly working on new plan design stuff and getting moving on that. So
Oh my God.
that'll position us well for the summer when folks want to take time off, and we'll have design stuff behind us.
The mass vacation. I think most people at the beaches are HR teams. So Um, well, we have a lot of people. Thank you all for posting in. It looks like we have some directors of HR and comp, lots of comp analysts, some HR officers, which we love. So welcome everyone. For people who are now joining, you can post in the chat where you're dialing in from and your title. I'll go ahead and actually kick off with housekeeping because it'll buy us a little minute for anyone who straggles on. But welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining our fireside chat today. We're very excited that we're going to go over compensation philosophies and MRPs, which, all of us probably live and breathe daily. Um, we are very excited to have Brad, who is a compensation director from MozTech, on the call. Brad and I actually have worked together previously through Pequity and after. So I'm really excited to have him on the call. He has a deep set of knowledge that he'll be able to share with us, especially coming out of a comp cycle. And for anyone who doesn't know myself, I am Caitlin. I am the CEO and co-founder of Pequity. But my background is thoroughly compensation HR. My new joke is that I just have an identity crisis. I wanted to build a software to solve all the problems I had in-house. And so now Pequity is the centralized compensation resource for compensation cycles, letter delivery, range builds, you name it, we're in the mix. And we're launching our AI play. So if you guys want to learn more about that, follow us on LinkedIn. But the main point of this chat today is going to be on compensation philosophies, MRPs. There's a lot happening in the world with tariffs and everything else. The way this flow will go, the first 30, 45 minutes, Brad and I will talk through the main topic, which is the MRPs and the comp philosophies. And the final 15 to 30 minutes will be reserved for questions. We do have questions that people submitted as they registered. However, if you do have questions that you want to ask, feel free to put them into the chat, or preferably if you could put them into the Q&A section. It should be on the bottom of your screen and it should be a little Q&A icon. If you don't see it, you might have to click into the three dot more, but that will let Brad and I be alerted there's a question and we'll go through those at the end. So I got through all the housekeeping, gave us plenty of time. Again, we are welcoming Brad, a compensation director at MozTech, but I really can't do credit to your career, Brad. So I'd love if you could just give a little introduction on yourself.
Yeah, thank you. So it's great to have you all here today. It's great to join and talk about this and coming out of comp cycles. It feels good to rejoin the world, as I mentioned. So I go back a long way. I go back from to started at the green screen DOS prompt and come forward to the world of AI today. So I've seen a lot there, and moving through that continuum has I've spent a lot of time with technology implementations around HR and compensation and related things, performance management. And so I'm heavily influenced and always interested in that world. But then also, really, number two is I found some time ago that if I align myself and if I align my work to talent management, that makes for a much more informed product that I can build with, in the total reward space. And by talent management, I'm referring to all the things. So it's talent acquisition, it's learning and development, it's organizational design, it's workforce planning. But the folks that do that work, whether they're within an HR department or consultants or what, oh, I forgot an employee sentiment or engagement survey that could be in there as well. There are so many more touchstones within the organization of data that we can take advantage of if we ask and if we try to get involved, that can inform what you do in compensation, and then you can tie compensation to those things. And so you'll probably hear me talk a little bit about that today and some of those experiences. So shout out to all the talent management folks that might be on the call today.
Super exciting and a lot of things to definitely cover. Um, One area, that if we want to dive right into it, the key that we were kind of talking about with comp philosophies and MRPs and everything, how to model pay increases based on the comp philosophy and MRPs. This year, and probably the past 5 years have been wild with COVID, and then we had the banks fiasco and the markets with hyperinflation, and then it came down. And I'm sure everyone on this call is exhausted by being at the tail end of that whip. And so when we talk about giving these compensation increases related to MRPs, which are market reference points, for anyone who doesn't use that acronym every day. I would love to know, how have you been navigating this kind of challenging climate where the MRPs, I would say, are wildly oscillating and not always consistently so?
Yeah, first off, there's so many choices of market data, and I think they're all good. My only requirement has ever been I want a big database, I want a lot of
Yep.
ends, and I want someone who's got some background in statistics to be able to model that and provide it to me. Otherwise, it could be from the talent acquisition world, it could be web scraped, it could be traditional club surveys, but I think having and it's not a bad idea to have multiple touchstones and looking at those. When in the world, I know we have some folks from media entertainment content on the call today, and I remember using industry data specific there, where annually it was club survey data. And so we would get a year over year analysis, a year over year same incumbent analysis by job type, job family, and levels, and be able to understand that movement. And that's time consuming and expensive. But like, what a great way to sort of really understand where there's double digit growth, and understanding, especially the same incumbent analysis, which can't be easy to sort of do. It takes a lot of, curated approach, but I felt best in sort of that world of having that data. And then there's other times where I'm just interested in supply and demand and hot jobs and hot skills and things of that nature. But I think having a focus around different sort of market data approaches to begin with are super important. One survey taker during the pandemic, leaned in, a consulting firm that you would all know. I'm going to try to not drop too many names today, but and engaged with us on a biweekly basis when I worked for a retailer, and they
Mhm.
were talking about have quick little 20-minute meetings every couple of weeks, what they were seeing, what we were seeing, micro surveys, and jumping into that so that we could understand, get as close to real time as we possibly could with these conversations. But I think it's important to a compensation philosophy for me is not just a piece of paper. It's not just a grid or a statement. It's something that I refer back to, especially when I'm in uncharted waters, as sort of the role that I stepped into here, which was a day one starting point for data. I wanted anyone looking at what I had done to understand what I had done and why.
Yeah.
And if they disagreed with it, I could at least have something to point to. This is what I did. This is why I did it. This is when I did it. These were the factors that I took into consideration, and could come back to that fundamental, philosophy grid, which, by the way, I'm happy to share. It's a simple template. I'm happy to share with anyone, maybe redact a couple of pieces of information. And I think I think working with leaders at all levels of the organization, from frontline supervisors to the C-suite, they don't like knee-jerk reactions. They want to understand what you're doing as part of a plan, and there's going to be spikes in markets and locations and jobs and skills and things of that nature. But they don't always want to necessarily respond to those. And if you're going to go forth and respond to those, especially if you're asking for money and asking for a good bit of money, get your story straight, or I will get my story straight with the talent management partners that I mentioned before, to make sure that we're all in agreement and alignment with this response that we're going to have to the marketplace. And it's not just an MRP. It's well-rounded feedback that is coming in, that's going to land with the people, the leaders making those decisions.
Yeah. And I love your point on the leaders in business not liking knee-jerk decisions, because I will also point out that a lot of our leaders are probably the ones having the knee-jerk reactions to these spikes, or like, oh, I got this counter offer, inflation, like everything else. But I love calling it out because, and I'll put out there transparently, Pequity does have a real-time market data play. But I have some gripes with real-time data. Mainly being that when we talk about real time, what I actually want is real time to look at trends. I don't think it's a good practice to be like, oh, there's a real time single moment movement and I need to respond to that, right? Like today the market went up 5%, and that's like something I have to respond to. And I think that that's a key point to these MRPs, and kind of what you're getting at, which is you have to have this like core and discuss the response, because everything that we do, especially with salaries, it's so sticky. And I think we saw a lot of this during the pandemic of companies that, especially that were using the Pequity software, inflation was rising and they're like, oh my gosh, we're going to meet the full inflation effect. But then things cooled, and inflation didn't necessarily cool, but the employment market did. And so there's all these employees who had huge raises, were very expensive, and we saw the layoffs that kind of happened after. And I can't help but think that those go hand in hand, and it probably came from reacting too quickly. And I'd love to know, as you're looking at these merit increases and the changing market, do you have some best practices? We got a lot of questions that were like, are there any broad stroke best practices on like setting rates or how to view these changes? And I think people might be thinking about like tariffs and inflation right now. I'm curious if you have advice for them that's kind of tactical.
I think there's you have to have a good solid, or I feel I have to have a good solid foundational core to the programs. And that's like, so we have 14 pay bands, and those 14 pay bands fit the entire workforce within those pay bands. And again, this was kind of the starting point, so we'll probably tweak it from there. But I've got geographic differentials sort of baked into that. And there's career ladders and levels for some jobs, others there's not. And then, separate from that, we have our short-term incentive program, discretionary for lots of frontline folks, and then, a management incentive plan for others, and so forth. And then we look at eligibility, but it's not expressly tied to the grades. And then then we have, we've got performance management. By the time we come around to, and the grades are informed, and the movement of the bands is informed by market movement and so forth. One other element I would add to that is, I now know, I've never worked in this industry before, but I now know the 5 job groups that we have that everyone is concerned about because of supply and demand, and they're easily poached. And so we look at those very closely. We position them higher within bands today. Maybe not the best methodology, but we're basically moving them up a band if we in response to market pressure. There's probably smarter ways to do that, but I'm trying to keep the structure simple as everyone learns it. But everyone knows what they are. We look after and groom that talent and make sure that they're fed and cared for. And then there's other jobs that we're not so worried about. This is also an eat what you kill environment in terms of us getting large projects.
Yeah.
So, we get a project, that project is in a place, we're going to staff it quickly. Is it a build or buy situation? Oftentimes it's a buy situation. So we're going to get folks with experience and credentials and certifications kind of day one. Even there might be opportunities for some apprentices, but if you've got to hit the ground running, that's a factor in pay positioning and what you're going to pay within a band or relative to the market. And then so when you roll around to the comps, if you've done all of those things and you have all of that knowledge and you have all of those things, even if they're not, working perfectly or like as precise as you may want to, when you're kind of landing the plane with performance management, we're then able to say, okay, well, we have a budget. This is the budget. It's time to land the plane. We've got a 3-factor rating scale for performance, below meets and exceeds. And then, a budget of X that's like informed by the market, and everyone would like to have more, but it's what we have. And so it's a little bit easier to then deliver those pools for distribution to leaders when we have all of those things kind of behind us. And we're not going to think quite as much about tariffs or inflation or what's going to happen. Some of that gets ultimately resolved with attrition anyway.
Yeah.
And so we don't, again, back to that, aren't going to worry about knee-jerk responses, like kind of moment in time sort of things, and let business run the course. Which again goes back to my earlier point about what makes management happy is they want you to think about year over year, the year that you're in, and
Yeah.
then look at things year over year, but not respond to those spikes.
And I think going a little deeper into that, like I want to ask some questions to clarify for the group, because I find this interesting whenever whenever I've gotten to go into companies and do consulting. When you say you have 14 pay bands, do you mean that you have 14 pay bands that cover every single employee? And so it's basically a grade system and you fall within the grade be only on experience, or is it also by technical ability?
Yeah, it's definitely technical ability. It's definitely the MRPs that are, we in the philosophy, kind of have a middle of the road philosophy for 50th percentile, with the exception of these, jobs that are where demand is high and supply is low. We'll go to sort of 75th. But yeah, it's from the frontline worker, non-union. We have a big union contingent, but frontline worker to the top executives within that structure. And basically we're market pricing the jobs to make the determination for where they'll go. Some career ladders are taller than others.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's individual jobs, and then we have maybe 20 job families that they cut across all together.
Awesome. And something that you brought up that I think is part of this conversation as well, especially actually with AI coming into the space, which I'll tie in a second, is this concept of the skills and the length of tenure, right? That we expect an employee to be in a certain skill set. Um, the reason I bring up AI is we see right now, if you have any AI experience and you're an engineer, you're getting like launched into pay that's probably 2 grades above where you should, where you probably would have been on a normal scale. But it brings up this really interesting concept with MRPs around how we think about tenure, scope, scale, and it ties to those increases, right? I always think about it when I build my ranges. Are they wide enough? Like if I have a terminal role, like a L5 business ops role, or P5, if you guys are thinking about the surveys, I think that person could be terminal. They may never make it up to a P6, right? There may not be scope or work that gets them there. So that range has to be wide enough and competitive enough to accommodate multiple increases. Curious how you think about those, if that has any place in your ranges, or if you rely more on the MRPs adjusting to accommodate that.
Yeah, and I actually saw in one of the questions that was submitted before we launched, there was a note in there about experience levels and compa ratios.
Yeah.
I have to tell you that when I hear about years of experience, I'm always like, I've never liked that, consideration. If I may be remembering this wrong because it's been a long time, but I think in my initial training doing comp, I thought we talked about years of business cycles. So to be
Mm,
competent in this job, you will be successful in this role with 3 business cycles with our company or a similar company. And that was kind of the years of experience. It wasn't necessarily like someone's resume, but what I've observed is there's people who work on developing their skills, and there's people who Netflix and chill. And so the clock is ticking for all of us. As we take another tour around the sun. But you really have to look at the skills, and folks need to be able to demonstrate those skills that they have them, because resumes can be easily doctored today with assistance from AI, and people can interview very well and pass those tests, but they have to be able to come in and perform the work successfully. And so I'm always making sure, asking the questions: are they able to demonstrate these skills, not just mention these skills? And then do they have the right amount of experience to sort of hit the ground running, or what are our expectations? And then I think one of the pitfalls of administering any sort of a pay banding system can be around the temptation to put someone in a higher level job within the career stack to get them the money that they want, but that's not really where they are. And you're doing the person and you're doing the team and the work a disservice by doing that. I would rather have them be an anomaly, be a high water marker over the band, but classified correctly, so that when we're looking at the data, we know we're all looking at the same information and sort of understand that.
yeah.
Um, I think I rambled for so long. I think I forgot your original question.
Oh, no, no. Yeah. Just thinking about tenure and like moving through and how that might impact either the comp philosophy design or the percentage, or the size, I guess, of increases that we give.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think we've been working with same sort of percentage pot of money. It works fairly well. I think it's important. I think an additional compensation cycle for base pay treatment, and it's something that you and I talked about. It's something that you kind of turned me onto the notion of. I think the organization needs a break from going through performance bonus, merit increases, and the
Yeah.
time to look at promotions, and if it's technical talent, especially like special treatment there. I don't get involved in equity compensation here, although in this industry it doesn't go very deep anyway.
Yeah.
Pretty much VP, at least at the lowest level, VP and above. But like having an opportunity to think about those things for succession planning, or career track movement, true promotions separate from merit, I think just a really, in the middle of the year, or whenever, middle of your fiscal year, or whatever it may be, is just a really good idea. So that you can, and then the top leaders seem to like to see every recommendations for everybody at once at the same time,
Yes.
and be
Yeah.
able to calibrate that way versus the something on an anniversary date, or just kind of randomly flowing in.
Oh yeah, the anniversary, we support companies who do anniversary date increase, but I always wonder how you can be consistent. And it's also so distracting because it's like it gets really personal. You're only focused on one human, and so it's like their situation is so top of mind then. I have a feeling that more bias might come into those situations. I mean, not that it does, it would just be my concerns. And that actually, as we're talking about these increases, a question that did come in, and you kind of referenced around it. Um, how do you handle with these increases? Like you just came off your comp cycle, I'm sure it came up. How do you handle discussions about inflation and the adjusted cost of living right now?
Yeah, we've got people sort of, all over it's domestic only, but we've got people all over the United States, some doing project-based work. We have lots of contingent workers. Those kinds of things have, I think they come up in us winning or not winning business, and our ability to compete on certain projects and want to take on certain work. But that's not really come up in conversation for at the employee sort of level. We've not, yeah,
You're
it's not.
lucky. Yeah. For anyone who does have um any experience with those conversations right now, I can say, and I know you've probably heard me say this before, Brad, we really focus on cost of labor. And cost of labor over a trailing 6 to 12 month average is what I think about with inflation. A lot of inflation is here to stay. Like at Google, actually, we used to use Numbeo, which a lot of people are like, oh my gosh, that's not like that established of a tool. But I was like, it was pretty effective for us to like triangulate in on like cost of living changes, especially internationally. And ERI.com is a great resource as well for international. But we often talked about the cost of labor because cost of living was so subjective, right? I could live in a penthouse in the center of Manhattan with a, 4 car, well, I guess when I have a garage, but I have 4 cars in the parking lot somewhere, and that is a very expensive choice and cost of living versus someone who lives in upstate New York or middle America, and dials in every day. And so if they're in the same role level and doing the same work, arguably outside of some very large parameters around the cost of labor in those regions, we're not going to give them very different pay. The better comparison is probably someone in Manhattan versus like right outside of New York. Same geo, doing the same work. We're not going to pay them differently. And so we steered a lot of people into cost of labor. And I think the problem with inflation is that the perception is that cost of labor is also changing. And I have stats from like our companies on like what they've been doing for their merit pools. I'm curious, Brad, if you're open to sharing either how you set the merit pool or if you know the percentage and are able to share like what you did this year for a percentage.
Yeah, so we looked at I've been a big fan of the World at Work annual salary budget survey. It's like 20 minutes of your time and the end is just massive with that. So pulled together, I think we looked at, Conference Board, Gartner, Willis Towers Watson or Mercer, maybe pay scale, and kind of aggregate those together for the various workforce tiers and groupings, and then say, and I think it was called out. I think it was World at Work that had like a big splashy headline the year before last of, highest market movement that we've seen in decades, or whatever it was. And so just put that in front of leadership and finance when we're talking about this. And that was certainly 4%, maybe slightly above the past couple of years, and we ended up with 3
Mhm.
um, overall. But of course, there's going to be additional treatment and consideration for your high pose. So after the talent review of your succession planning, 9 box performance potential sort of thing, there's people identified there are probably hitting double-digit increases, but based on that, based on promotions and based on the view of their ability to have an impact on the business. And then we can also dial up. We have within our annual incentive plan that has a clinical outcome and formula. We have the ability to do discretionary adjustments there for those individuals that are really knocking the cover off the ball, or if they had a bad year due to things beyond their control, we could keep them motivated and here by adjusting pay there. So that's another vehicle is the incentive.
Awesome. And um, a lot of that, you mentioned 9box and some of these programs. And oh, I also want to add that for anyone who's curious, our customers on average are at 3.6% was this year. It's been going down a little. I do see some trends kind of trickling down, and a lot of people are skipping, but they do 3.6. And interestingly, we've seen lower eligibility. I don't know if that's a trend everywhere, but in general, it was something like 90+% of orgs during 2022 to 2024 were eligible to some degree. 2024 saw a small dip, and now it's like much lower, around like 70, which is a pretty big drop from that 90s. So take that as you will. But I'd love to come back to this concept of a 9box because it was a question that also came in. And for anyone unfamiliar with like the 9box grid, I think there's different, adjectives that we put into it, whether it's growth, and I don't know, it's achievement and potential is one I've seen. So how much they actually achieved, how much do we think they can still achieve? Um, I've even seen like behavior and performance on these 9 grid boxes. Not sure how you think about 9 grids, Brad, but they are of interest to people because it's kind of how we map our talent to say if you're in the upper right quadrant, you're the best. Like, we want to keep you. You are in the up and to the right where we need to be. Bottom to the left usually is terms, like people that we are not fighting to keep at this organization. And then there's a mixed bag across the other two quadrants, or corners, basically. Curious, Brad, like, how do you use nine boxes if you do, or have you used them in your past? And how do you think about those in terms of increases, whether that's allocation of the pool, or any creative ways that you've kind of leveraged them in your planning?
Yeah, I think, I think it's a very powerful tool. I think I was working in a manufacturer the first time I saw one and it was involved, I think they had, I forget if I think they had software, but you don't necessarily have to have software to do it. But um, those were my first introduction was truly around succession planning of the top of the house leaders. So who's going to be our next, SVP of business development? Who's going to be our next, P&L leader for the West market or whatever. But it started to trickle down and down and down. And then you started sort of seeing it everywhere, certainly within technical teams, operations teams, maybe less, administrative roles and so forth. Um, but I think it's great. The best and brightest are going to blaze their own career paths. And, you often feel that you're lucky to have them in the first place. And so they're going to chart their own course, and they're going to be intrapreneurs and they're going to be entrepreneurs, but that they're often it's often drive-by talent because it's hard to keep them engaged if they're if they're so wildly talented. And so those are kind of maybe the anomalies. But I think it's a wonderful tool. And then the other thing is there it's performance and potential, but it's like who is in the way of that performance and potential? So the blockers, right? And that's not fun to sort of talk about, but does someone need to be moved aside in order to make the trajectory for that person? And then that's the list. I think most companies, whether we're aware of them or not, as HR practitioners and comp practitioners, most companies have those. I've often felt that operational leaders, P&L leaders can line people up against the wall and know exactly if they had to do a reduction in force, they know exactly who they would
Yep.
let them and why. And so maybe going with their gut, maybe it's not purely scientific. And so you can put the gut and the science together with these exercises and be challenged and defend these things. But yeah, those are the people consistently who are getting the double digit increases, the recognition, the thank yous. Let's not forget about free recognition,
Mhm.
public acknowledgement of projects completed, customers delighted, timelines being met, like all of that stuff. It's a dinner, it's President's Club, like all of those kinds of things. I know a lot of that with T&E budgets getting smaller and people working remotely. We don't have as many opportunities for that as we did in the past, but um, it's an example for an average person to understand what great looks like, and and to start to sort of model that behavior. I think if you do those kinds of things. I'm also a fan of this notion of, I have a love-hate relationship with competencies, but
Yeah.
competencies sort of served warm, where it's not, you're pushing out 30 PowerPoint slides of competencies. If you're looking at those things relative to skill development and performance and setting someone up for success and painting the view of what success looks like, then you can take money out of the equation for a minute as you look at where do they truly fit, where are they truly contributing, where can they go next based on those competencies and those behaviors, doing the right things. And then the money, and then just set up a structure where the money will just follow in terms of that. And it's interesting. You can always find. I found it's really hard to find a pool of money, 3 or 4% for the masses, but it's easy to find money when you're talking about the top talent that's getting things done. Then all of a sudden the money appears.
Oh, for sure. And when we talk about nine box, I really think that when people do compa-ratio matrices, it's kind of like forming a really complex nine box, right?
Yeah,
Um, and I saw a couple questions on algorithmic and discretion, which I think this could be a great lead into. But when I think about our nine boxes, I remember when I put one together at Cruise Automation where we had performance and behavior as part of it. And we basically said that if we map the comp ratio in that box, what do we care about most? And we would put the 1.2 comp ratio or max up in that upper corner and say that we're comfortable with that talent going to range max. And ideally on the way to promotion, right? Like if they're up in that quadrant, we're thinking about them for the next level. If they're at the bottom, we are much more comfortable with them being at range minimum. And we would actually flag if they got an increase over a certain percent because obviously if they're already in range and they're not doing well, we don't want to reward that behavior. And what was really interesting was the way that we would pull apart what mattered to the org across like these, it started out with performance and behavior. It might have moved to performance and potential, however they wanted to frame that up. But which one do you weight more? Like, do you care more about the potential or the current performance? And we had all these lively debates around it that I thought were really telling and actually very helpful in us rewarding people. Because I agree with you, like the upper and lower ends of the quadrant, those are easy. The middle ground is like, well, what do I do with like, do I, if they're already at the midpoint, for instance, do I give them an increase if they're meeting expectations? Um, if anyone uses a comp ratio matrix or has seen one that we have published previously, I like to put my meets expectations at midpoint or directly at MRP as a target. Because in my mind, I have said if I say I pay the 50th percentile or I pay 75th, that is the target that someone performing all aspects of the job should be paid. If they're below it and they're meeting expectations, I want to get them there quickly. If they're above it and they're just meeting expectations, I don't feel as compelled to have to do something. I think they're already paid a good amount, and that's where discretion comes in. And that's where I would love to hear your perspective, Brad. I know you have some discretionary planning as part of yours, but how do you weight between, this very logical algorithmic side and opening it up for discretion? Like, what is your philosophy in handling that when, as we all know, our jobs as comp practitioners is to target the market rate, which we could argue is not a scientific spot, but for most of our leaders, they think of it as a scientific spot.
Yeah, yeah. We've one of the things that we did this past year was, we're sort of softly rolling out the pay bands that we have, but only to the HR community where they can see comp ratios, but planning managers could not see that. And we just didn't, we didn't have we didn't think that the timing was right to do the education and the learning and development around that, to be able to share. But we wanted the HR, partners to be empowered with it. And that's very sort of compelling because you can see person by person where they're fitting in the band, where they're fitting to one another. Drill into that a little bit more if you want to. Um, but it's I think it's exactly that. I think it's just um, understanding, your high pose, what the tolerance is. We don't fuss with comp ratios to a great extent. So we don't have hard stops. We don't green circle and red circle folks.
Mhm.
It was kind of like it's guidance, it's a
Yep.
guideline, it's guidance as we do this. But they are forced to stay within the budget unless they can get additional budget from their supervisors or whatever, or earmark someone from for a promotion. One of the interesting things, I don't know that I've ever seen anyone do this, but I remember in my training, back in the day, was adding to a merit matrix notion of a time delay, which
Hmm.
again I've never seen anyone do, but it's
Interesting.
actually like in one of the World at Work training booklets where a lower performer is eligible for a certain amount of money based on the merit matrix of performance and comp ratio, but they're going to get it later. And so,
Oh, interesting.
yeah, like I thought that was, instead of every 12 months, it might be 18 months if you're a lower performer, or it's accelerated to 9 months if you're a higher performer. I've never seen anyone actually do that, but I think it's worth sort of, kind of considering. Um,
And how does that in practically like very brass tacks here? It's if I'm on this matrix, I'm a low performer. I would still be modeled for an increase, but it's saying you will get this increase in 12 months. That'd be like a delay on payroll, or is it just marking you for the next cycle? It's like, oh, they were eligible for this. Now that comes to fruition and we model them again for their new one.
Yeah, it would be like if you're truly low performer, it could be zero, and maybe you're on a performance improvement plan, or under close sort of supervision. But if it's like someone new to the job who moved into a different field, maybe they have experience, but that experience, and they're in a new job, and that experience maybe doesn't apply or whatever. They're sort of learning, they're ramping up. It could be you communicate that you're eligible to participate in this program. This is, sort of the budget that we're allocated. This is what you're looking like, but we're going to make you wait for a longer period of time to get the award, and here are the things that you need to do to grow into the competencies or the level of performance that we expect, and then they get that delayed increase. Yeah.
Interesting. I've never seen that. So that's a very intriguing concept to me.
Yeah, I'd be interested to know if anyone has experienced that. I think they're, one of our chief people officer uses the word simple a lot, and
Yeah.
simplicity, and like a lot. And so that's something that he would say, I think that's a horrible idea. I don't want to do that. It's actually not a horrible, he wouldn't say it's a horrible idea. He might be geeked out by it too, but it would be, you have to have the systems, you have to be able to handle that complexity and have the systems to be able to support that, to do it. But I think it's something that, it seems rational, and I think it's something that could be
Could be
sold to an
Yeah.
organization.
Well, and to your point, and I think, the question that we had on the spectrum of discretion to, algorithmic, I would probably argue a lot of comp professionals like algorithmic. That's what we do. Like we're in the
Yeah.
math, we know the targets, we're like, we're gonna get them there, we're gonna build the system. But I actually think a really good point about when you're choosing that spectrum is what do you have in place? The ones I usually, obviously software, so Pequity, of course, small prop there, but the other systems I really think about is like HR organizational systems. So if you're gonna have a bonus, for example, we have so many companies that are very small, like early stage companies, they'll launch a bonus and they don't have an objective plan. They don't know how they're gonna measure if it's company performance or employee performance. Sometimes they'll say, oh, it's employee performance and there's no calibration. And what that usually means is that everyone just gets their bonus, which is great to some degree. But if you're trying to use bonus for performance or to signal certain things, then you lose that value and it's just money out the door. So I often think when I'm on this like spectrum of discretion to algorithmic, do I have the system to be algorithmic? Because I think that that's probably more consistent. And with MozTech's a large organization. Um, and I'm curious, when you talk about having discretion, do you give every manager discretion? Like, does every manager have some level with their employees, or is it only the upper levels?
Yeah, no, they really, I don't think we empower for, sort of frontline the first level of supervision, to be involved, or like first level of hire fire supervision. So probably a manager in our leveling stack versus a supervisor. And we probably have 20 job titles that are classified as supervisor because of the industry, superintendents and foremans, and I'm using supervisor generically, but we've pretty much been keeping it at director level and above in the organization. However, with the intent to, and one of our VPs of HR for one of the businesses said, I would really like to get to the point where we can drill this down further and have managers be involved in the process so that they can learn what the process is, and so they can be prepared themselves to be directors and understand get an appreciation for how difficult these decisions can be. But like a small amount of discretion, but enabled with the tool and technology, um, our ability these past 2 years to, within the tool, in the moment, as
Yeah.
we're going through this, comment and tag. So I'm gonna tag in my boss, I'm gonna tag in my HR partner, I'm gonna start a little chat, like, what do you think? Quick powwow, and then you get something done and through. You've got your eligibility, criteria, and sort of a softer, a hard warning flag. But then you're also, working a particular, maybe not every employee, but you're working the sensitive employee sort of down quickly together, and then you're getting that perspective on what you should do and when you should do it. And so that's where I think the algorithms and the qualitative stuff come together nicely.
Yeah, for sure. And um, leaning into this algorithm, because there was another question as well that we got, and I actually want to switch to Q&A here pretty quickly. So people, if you have questions, submit them, send them our way. But one question we got was, how do you model these increases? Like when you have to model adjustments for large groups of employees, taking in all the things we just discussed, right? Like their performance, their tenure, and we're trying to get that budget number to send to finance, which, as we all know, it's like a chicken and the egg. It's like, what's the budget? And we're like, well, what's the performance? And we go in this little dance. Would love to hear what you maybe have advice on how to complete that task, and I can also provide some of ours.
Yeah, so we start with those industry surveys that I mentioned before, the budget surveys, and where things are sort of coming in. Um, Talk about what we need to earmark for promotions and progressions beyond just sort of the annual merit treatment. Um, most employees are eligible. We have very sort of broad eligibility, and then it's modeling the bell curve. We have a 3-point performance appraisal that we're pretty comfortable with, and that was comes out of the simple philosophy. It's an electronic form, but pretty much doesn't take long to get through an employee's review, and then we put those things together. So have a couple of years of performance history now to look at what was the curve.
Yep.
We coach and counsel organizations that tend to everyone's wonderful and everyone's outstanding and exceeds, and we've pushed back on that and said, the business results that you're having do not fit, the bell curve that you have with these performance ratings. And there's been some do-overs, some redos, with getting that sort of corrected as we go through it. But it's a traditional sort of process that we've got the budget, the anticipated, where everyone's falling within the bands, the performance expectations, the curve that we're sort of going after, and then that's the guidance that we put out. But again, it's soft flag guidance, not hard flag guidance for us.
Let's follow.
Pros and cons to each.
Yes. And just echoing along that, similar, when I've done practices, um, and I'll also, for anyone who's interested, we just started this. I get this question all the time of how do I budget? Like, what should I budget for the merit matrix and for my comp cycle? What do I do? We're building templates in Pequity, and so I'm building my own template that we're going to give to anyone who wants to use it. It'll be based on what I did when I was at Google, Cruise, Instacart. I had a standard, like vanilla path that I would then tweak based on the market, the business, whatever I was doing. Um, and I'd be curious if this fits anything that you do. It sounds like very similar with you, Brad, where I would force a distribution. I'd put in randomized ratings. I like the 3 rating for sure. I could only ever get away with like 4 at like the least. Most I think business have 5. So mine starts with 5. And we would model around that 1.0 compa-ratio, targeting basically whatever those surveys said. So if you're at a 1.0 compa-ratio, and meeting expectations, my bump to you would be what the market has said is the labor adjustment that year. And then from there, we would have this kind of polynomial for anyone who's get fancy, where as you went above the compa-ratio, you got smaller increases until we would zero you out at certain magnitudes and certain amounts. And below, you get larger increases actually, unless your rating went down, right? And we would actually give huge increases to bring people up to range. And what it just meant is that the further you were below your compa-ratio, the larger your increase, the further above, the smaller. And we had these magnitude concepts because I like magnitude. Like I don't like, and I know you're similar to this, Brad. I don't like when I have like an open discretion process and I see managers moving like $200 between people. And
Yeah.
I'm like, what are you, like, they're not even going to notice that on their paycheck. And it's just more work for HR. So we would put that in place. And that method serves me very well as a fast and dirty to take to my finance team and be like, I distribute it this way. And the part I'd love to gut check with you is I actually, and I think this usually surprises, maybe it doesn't surprise the people on this call, but when I talk with leaders, I'm targeting like 60% of my talent to be meets expectation. Like if
Yeah.
we're doing our job well as HR, majority, if it's a 5 rating scale, is at the midpoint. And then I usually only have about 5% at the top, like the tippy top, and then I'll have actually 10% at my lowest. Because I'm taking in people who will probably be termed as well as people going on PIPs. And I'll figure
Yeah.
out the ratio between the other two. I'm not sure if that fits the curve you also look for.
It really sort of does. And I think I've been looking at these for a long time in a lot of different industries, and it's always sort of a wave. It's always leaning to the right if you start with low to high performance ratings. But if the, we'll cut it by, so we have many companies within the company, and we'll cut it by the individual company or group of companies and do a calibration exercise. So we force the executives through a calibration exercise,
Yeah.
and they act like they've been called to the principal's office, you know. But it's like, okay, here's what we're seeing. Here are the dollars. Here's where they're going. Here's how you treated your vice presidents relative to your rank and file percentage wise. Here's what people in protected classes look like against others. And then this year we added a bonus sort of scorecard piece to that as well, which is great because we can. That's really where, with performance based, business performance based, operating income, safety, um, how fast we get cash from customers, day sales outstanding. Those are real metrics, and we're expecting that the shape of the curve, for the things that impact the bonus is the same shape of the curve of things that are impacting merit, and
Mhm.
where they're out of alignment. We're calling those things out. They get their day in court to explain things, and in some cases they've had to go back. Yeah, I guess we were a little too generous on our performance rating curve. We'll go back and we'll not
That's,
recalibrate that. But
I think that's very friendly.
this is all before we do. So we're doing this as we're getting ready to do payouts,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
this is all before, and it's a healthy little exercise, and it doesn't take a ton of time to get there with your data. You're just talking pivot tables and some graphs or whatever to sort of share that, but you can roll it up quickly and then get be more confident about the decisions that you're making. And at the end of the day, like in my experience, P&L leaders, they're all comparing notes with one another.
Oh yeah, yeah, for
They're
sure.
all like, and so it's they all like, if you let them know what the standard is and what you're going to be how you're going to be conducting these sort of reviews and this calibration, they will shape with their leadership teams. Okay, we've got to balance this out to a based on the results that we truly achieved, and have it sort of like conform to this guideline that is the overall expectation. So that's a journey for sure to move
Oh, yeah.
through with multiple sets of leaders in a larger company.
But it sounds useful. And I love, I mean, I don't love calibrations for what they are, but I do love the outcome and the output. And I do, now that obviously with Pequity, we'll do some mini calibrations. We're much smaller of an org, but it really aligns the leaders. It gets them all singing from the same hymnal, so to speak. And that cultural ad for the next year when we talk about goals, and we're like, oh, we all aligned that this was important and we have to like when I go to calibration as a leader, that's what's going to be put on the board. I need to fight for that. It makes the performance management so much easier, I find. And I think the bonus is more impactful because it's like what we discussed. Everyone knows we deliver that news to the employee. So I emphasize, despite the pain that they can be, to your point, they're not that much time and they have really wide reaching reciprocal rewards on that. And I know we have about 6 minutes. We have one question here that Allison sent in. So I just want to see if we have time to answer this. Allison just wanted to know, how do you approach situations where experienced, high-performing employees have a compa ratio that is in range, but the compa ratio is low?
That would be, from my perspective, that would be something that would be on my radar. That would be something that gets addressed and gets attention. And I would present that as something that we want to correct. Those are the things that the HR business partners are looking for as they go in. It's really amazing. This is like, this compensation cycles are compensation total rewards teams sort of dependent, but boy, do the HR business partners get involved, like heavily, heavily, heavily involved. And these are the things that they're looking for. They know the talent. I mean, I often say, the overall enterprise has 30,000 employees. We look after 11,000 employees. These are just columns and rows to me. And so I rely on the business partners, the HR business partners, to tell me, what's actually happening in those markets with that talent, with those leaders. And so they will look after that talent and push back to get the right rewards to the right people when they spot things like that. They're actually quite good at it. And it's a strong partnership between HR and finance, and operations sort of together. But yeah, I totally rely on their judgment, and calling these things out. And we'll call out things that we see now. We're doing an exercise of ungraded jobs, people falling out of grades, looking at men and women. We're looking at all sorts of things. The degree of awards people in a discretionary incentive plan versus a formal incentive plan, who should be in an incentive plan that isn't in one today, based on what the market says they should be paid in total cash compensation, or what it is that they're contributing. So nominations to be entered into incentive plans for people that aren't there today. But yeah, no, I think I mean that's what the comp ratio, maybe you use market index or comp ratio, but that's what it's there for. We should all absolutely be looking at that and leveraging that, at least to ask questions, if not to make, to earmark funds for those situations.
Yeah. And I would say, there's a lot of open questions I would have around this, like, are we experiencing pushback to giving this employee a raise? Like, if they're really high performing, I imagine, as Brad said, that budget's there. It's just getting it to the right person. I also would find if a business is cash constrained, um, I really, there's a couple of models of questions I've heard people ask, and one is like, if this person quit today and then their twin with the same exact experience, knowledge, context, everything, knocked on the door tomorrow, what do we pay them to get them in the door?
Yeah,
Because sometimes people are like, oh, like they're happy, they're fine, like don't, we don't want to disturb anything. And it's like, okay, they are maybe because they're a good employee and they don't want to cause drama and like whatever else. But if they left, how would you feel? And it's that, you almost have to inspire like the visceral reaction sometimes. And ask the why, because sometimes I've also had high performing employees. Like the cruise behavior thing was because we had really high performing, brilliant people, and some had difficult personalities and they were very hard to work with. And so sometimes you'll have a high performing employee that people like, I just don't want to go to bat for that person. But that should be a performance conversation. That is something you should be able to address with that person in a safe way. So if this is happening, to Brad's point, like that would flag something to me. And as the comp partner, not all of that is probably my responsibility. But my responsibility is to put out the like kind of context questions of like, how would we feel if they quit? Would we pay them this if they interviewed at this role again tomorrow? Why did this not get picked up before? Like, why are we okay with this? Like, probing at those things are kind of my job, and then letting the business partners complete their side of the task of talking to the org, the business, figuring those things out. Because if the reality is this is someone who is high performing but poor behavior, we don't want to keep them. We're not giving them an increase because we're hoping to encourage them to change behavior or leave. Then I am doing my job by keeping them at that rate, right? Like that is exactly what I should be doing. So it is a tight partnership situation across all these. But that was our last question that we had, which is right on time. So thank you. Thank you everyone who joined today. And thank you, Brad. This was so enlightening. I really appreciate your time and conversation as always. For everyone on the call, we will be sharing out the recording. We'll be sharing out Brad's uh, grid. It looks like we had a lot of our template. There's a lot of requests for that, Brad. So we'll get that from you. But Brad, if anyone wants to connect with you or ask more questions, what is a great way for them to get in touch?
well, I'd love to let everybody know I'll be at World at Work in Orlando next month. And we're doing a presentation on somewhat of a similar topic, talking about merit budgets. It's making limoncello out of lemons, I think, in the Grand Hall Tuesday in the afternoon. So absolutely stop by at that section. I'll be in the exhibit hall, sort of as well. And yeah, I'm available on LinkedIn. And I'd love to talk about more about this. Love to get other people's perspectives.
Yeah, love the conversation that we had. If anyone wants to get in touch with Brad, add him on LinkedIn. We'll send out the template. Also, feel free to reach out to Pequity if you have questions. We're launching more templates and hopefully things to help people through these budgeting times. That's kind of our goal. And I'm curious if people want them. So you guys are a great place for us to experiment on that. It'll be free. It'll be part of this, whatever we basically send out. So message, add me on LinkedIn as well. And if you have any ideas for further topics for Brad, myself, or anyone else, send them our way. And I hope everyone has a happy Easter weekend. So thank you, Brad. I really appreciate your time, and we'll talk to you soon.
You're welcome. Thank you, Caitlin. Enjoyed it.